For the first segment on this video, I'm going to show you some equipment you're going to need to get started in trapping. Behind me here, I have laid out some different traps and some basic tools you're going to need. First thing I think you're going to need is some kind of trap. Now, this is a foothold trap. You can also use cage traps or snares. In my home state, snare is kind of referred to as a cable restraint, and that's because of the laws that go with it regulating how it's allowed to be used. But for the most part, on my line, I use foothold traps. And for fox and raccoons, I prefer to use a 1.5 size trap. Now, the basic parts of the trap are the trap frame, the springs, which makes the levers move whenever an animal steps on the pan. This is the pan. Here's the springs. These are the levers. These are the jaws. And this is what's known as the dog. Now, how I set my traps, I take the heel of my hand right here on top of this lever, reach around and grab the trap like that, and I do the same on this side. And whenever I set them, I just twist. Whenever I twist, I get my thumb over here on top of the jaws and just keep twisting around just like that. Take the dog over top the jaw. Now I reach this thumb underneath the loose jaw and bring the pan up. Now the reason I put my finger underneath the loose jaw when I bring the pan up is just in case something slips, I don't get my finger pinched in there. Now as you can see, that trap pan's sitting up high like that. Once I get set like this, I'll take my finger underneath the loose jaw and bring the pan down to where it needs to be. That's basically how I set my traps. There are other ways you can do it. If you're not strong enough with your hands, put your feet on the levers, push them down, and set the trap that way. Another part of the trap is very important is the chain. And this chain is used for anchoring your trap into the ground so the animal doesn't carry it off. Another important part that I feel is very important to have are swivels. I have a swiveling point right here at my trap. I have another mid-chain swivel on this, and I have one more swivel at the end where I put my anchor at. Most of my anchors I use anymore are cable anchors. I'll show you those in a little while. Another style trap that some people will use and you might find are dogless traps. I set these the same way. I just twist, get my jaws down, reach underneath the loose jaw, and bring that pan up, just like that. Now, this is a dogless style trap, and what that means is there's no dog back here. Another style trap I like to use for raccoons is a dog-proof style trap. These I found are very nice traps when you're trapping in around houses that you're allowed to trap that people have dogs in. They're called dog-proof traps simply because they're dog-proof. In order to set this style trap here, take a hold of springs like that and compress them. I take the dog and bring it down over, just like that. And put the dog into the trigger notch, just like that. Now what happens with these is a raccoon in its nature will take its foot in there and get bait. If you put the bait underneath the trigger, whenever he's trying to get that bait up out of there, it'll activate the trap and you'll catch him. Next thing I'm going to talk about are anchoring devices. I like to use a mix on my line. I use rebar stakes and I use what's known as earth anchors. Another option is not really an anchor, but what's called a grapple or drag. And this trap here is set up with a drag, actually grapple, and this goes on a length of chain. It's basically a hook, and mine I have rigged up with an extra piece of chain down below the the hooks to help keep that on the ground so it doesn't bounce around. Now my stakes I use, like I said, are rebar stakes. They're about 18 inches long, and that's plenty long enough for my area. You got to really watch the ground whenever you're using these. You got to make sure your ground's hard enough that it's going to accept these, and the animal's not going to be able to jar them loose and pull them up out. Like I said, these are about 18 inches long. Your ground, you might have to use a longer one or get a special rig set up and cross stake or double stake your traps. The anchors I prefer to use on my line are earth anchors. This is just a cast steel bullet type stake. It has a cable on it for attaching your trap, and I've also added an extra piece of cable on the back, and this aids in pulling these things up out of the ground. If you don't have a puller on it, they're real hard to get up out of the ground sometimes. Now, these bullet stakes require a driver to put them in the ground. After you attach your trap to the correct piece of cable up here on top, you take your driver, place it in there, place that on the ground, take your hammer, and you beat this down into the ground. Once you get it down into the ground, you take the cable that's attached to your trap, you give it a yank, and what that does is whenever you're hammering this down into the ground to go down in like this, whenever you yank this, it's back here, catches on the ground, it sets that anchor like that. It's almost impossible for an animal to get these things up out of the ground once they're set correctly. Next tool I'm going to talk about is a trowel. Some people call them a shovel, I call them a trowel. The one I prefer to use has a 3-inch blade on it and a D handle. This D handle really comes in handy whenever you're trying to dig dirt out. Didn't have a D handle, just had the regular handle on it. It gets to beating your hand up a little bit, so I prefer to have a D handle on my trowel. Next thing I think you're going to need for doing land trapping is some kind of a sifter. Here's an old one that I use on occasion that I made when I first started trapping. It's just wood, it's got some handles on it, it's got probably a 1/4-inch mesh screen on it, and I just took some staples and stapled that screen on there. Another kind of sifter, this is one that I bought. They're about $7 or $8, they're pretty cheap. It just has some wire screen on the bottom, and it's all metal. Every year I'll clean this just like I clean my traps, and I'll also dye it, and it just helps to keep it from rusting out so it lasts a long time. Next tool you're going to need is some kind of a hammer to drive your stakes in. I like a 3-pound hammer. It just suits me a little better than a regular old claw hammer for pounding those stakes in. This seemed to go in a little better with it. I do, however, have used a claw hammer. I keep this in my vehicle as a backup, just in case I'd happen to leave my regular hammer at another set or something like that. You're also going to need something to carry your equipment in. Now, most of the time I just trap out of my vehicle, and I have my traps in a plastic tote that I got at a dollar store for like $10. Whenever I got to walk into a set, a lot of times I'll use a trap basket. A lot of people also use plastic buckets. I've used them in the past, and on occasion I still use plastic buckets. I also have a carrier here that I use for my lures and for my tools. I got this at a discount store as well. It's like $10 or $15, just like a carpenter's type bag. It's got 2 sides to it. One side I keep my clean tools in. On the other side I keep my lures, and that keeps everything separated. It has a handle on it, also a carrying strap you can throw up over your shoulder. For some reason I don't have my hip waders on whenever I'm setting traps. I also like to have a kneeling pad that I can kneel down on, keeps me clean. That's pretty much for the basic equipment that you're going to need. I'm going to go over some other equipment here a little bit later on for some specific kind of trapping, such as using cable restraints and snares. Okay, for my cable restraints, I like having a bag to carry them in. Some people get nail pouches and carry them in that, but I prefer this bag. It only cost me a couple dollars at a discount store. I keep my cable restraints in here, and I keep them coiled up just like that, so that they're easy and neat to gain access to. And all I do, like I said, I have them coiled up. A lot of them, right before season, I'll have made up and ready to go with anchors on them. And I just uncoil real easy, just like that. Nice and handy. Take and drop my stake in the ground, and I'm done with it. I can set this loop for whatever size loop that I want to catch an animal. I also like to keep a hatchet with me whenever I'm setting my cable restraints, just in case I need to cut a branch off or something for making a support device. So I like to carry a hatchet with me. Another important thing I need to keep is a pair of pliers. I use this for cutting and bending my wire to support my snares. And I'll also a lot of times have a support device already rigged up, such as just a stick, a piece of wire, and a backwards S bent into the wire. And all I got to do is drive a little hole down in the ground with my stake, put this in, throw my cable restraint in there, and I can make it set in a matter of minutes. I already have these all made up. There's one more tool that I like to use on my line that I'd like to share with you, and that tool is a catch pole. Catch poles are made for gaining control of your animal. You can use them for dispatching, but their main purpose is for gaining control of your animal. They're especially useful when you would happen to catch a domestic, such as a dog or a cat, which does happen on occasion. You put this around the animal's neck, that loop right there, and you close it, and then you now have control of your animal. So you can get your trap off its foot without it biting or clawing you. I made this one myself. It's just made out of a piece of 1-inch CPVC pipe with an end cap. Now this end cap has 2 holes drilled in it. I did that myself, and some cable running through it. If I can get it off here, I'll show you my cable setup. The end of my cable, I just have 2 annealed nuts on here. I just took a hammer and pounded them flat, nice and tight on that cable. I've tried one before and it does not seem to work. I've had the cable actually slip out of a single nut. That's why I put a double on there. The cable itself is just 3/16 nylon coated cable. Aids in the comfort of the animal, and if you have it on there, it's not just steel cable that's going to get caught up in the fur because it's got a nice coating on it. Put the end cap back on here and come over to this end. Now this end here has what's called a clothesline tensioner on it. And if I can get this apart, I'll show it to you. That's all the more it is right there. And that's what's known as a clothesline tensioner. It has some ball bearings in there and a spring, and the inside of it's made on an angle so that whenever the spring pushes up, it releases the ball bearings. When it pushes down, it's tight. When that thing's in a lock position, you cannot pull that cable. You can pull it one way and it'll move freely, but this way it will not. To release this, you just pull that just like that, and it releases. I just took my CPVC pipe and drilled a couple holes in it. You can see them holes right there. And I take my clothesline tensioner, which by the way is almost a perfect fit right inside that 1-inch CPVC pipe, and I eyeball the holes up with a pipe with the holes that are in the clothesline tensioner and this little hanger that comes with the tensioner. Put in just like that. Now some people will take pop rivets and pop rivet that in, but I kind of like the idea of having that on there, so I leave it on there. Again, you have the loop there, you put it around the animal, and to operate it, just take the end of it here and give it a pull, and it closes. This end here, I took another piece off of this pipe and I ran my cable up through it just so I could have a handle. You can probably see the 2 nuts I have in there on the cable. That just gives me a handle to give that a good pull. To loosen it up, just take this end right here, pull it up, and feed your cable back down through, and that'll open your loop up. Okay, first thing I'm going to show you is some of the tools I use for adjusting my traps. What I have here is a nut driver, and what I use that nut driver for is for the pan bolt nut. And the pan bolt goes right through the post for the pan and the pan itself. And right there's the bolt that it goes through, and the nut. And I also use a screwdriver. One side is a nut and the other side is a screwdriver end. And I'll just use those to adjust the pan wiggle and the drop. Another tool I use is just a regular pair of pliers, and I use these for adjusting my pan tension. I'll show you that in a little. I also use a file, and I use this file for rounding the inside edges off on my jaws, and also for filing a night latch in my pan notch. And the last tool I use is a claw hammer, and I use this claw hammer to adjust the pan level. Now, the first thing I do when I get new traps or even used traps is I will inspect them and make sure they're in proper working order as far as the frame and the jaws. Make sure there's no cracks or metal fatigue anywhere. And this one here looks like it's in pretty good shape. The very next thing I do is I take my file, and right on the pan notch I file another little notch in there, and this is called night latching. And what it does is it creates a small notch in there for your dog to set in. Whenever you set your trap, I'll show you after I do it, you'll hear a little click when you set it. You hear that click, that trap is set and ready to fire. Another advantage to that is my notches are usually right around a 1/16 by 1/16 of an inch. That means a 16-inch back and a 16th inch up. And that also helps for firing the trap faster. That pan has to fall very, very little, just a 1/16 of an inch in order for it to fire, which helps make that trap fire quicker. And as I said, I just take a file and lay it right into the pan notch and right onto the pan post, and I'll file a notch right back into that. Try to keep everything as square as possible, and it doesn't take much to file that little notch in there. I can give you a little close-up shot of what that looks like. You can see there's a little notch right there at the very end of it. I'm going to go just a little deeper with this one. And that looks to be pretty good right there. Now, as I said, when you set this, bring the dog over top the jaw, just take your pan and move it the whole way up, just like that. And bring it down until you hear a click. And that trap is set and ready to go. Now, if you can see this, you can see that pan is sticking up in the air whenever the trap is set in the fire position. What this means is the dog has to move in to drop that pan down. If your pan's actually pointing down too far, the dog has to move back. So how I adjust that is I take my hammer, my claw hammer, the claw, and put it right here where the dog goes. And I bend it in just a little. Something I forgot to show you I also do is on the dog here, I like to take a pair of pliers and crimp this dog closed just a little more than what it is from the factory. It can be tough to crimp closed, but that takes a little bit of the slop and play out of it. Okay, I got my dog closed a little more. I bent my pan post in some. Let's reset the trap and see how the pan sits now. I'm going to have to make my watch just a little more because it's too much of a hair trigger there. Just going to pile it back in just a little more. Okay, that should be good. You can go ahead and reset this and see where my pan's sitting. Okay, my pan's still sitting a little bit high, if you can see that. Going to set this off, and I'm going to bend this in just a little bit more. Just a little bit at a time is all you need. I like to make sure I get both sides bent. Sometimes if you get a cheaper trap frame, it'll only bend one side. Make sure both of them are bent. Then go ahead and reset this again. Okay, now it's going to be hard to see, but that trap pan's actually setting downhill just a little. I don't see that as a problem. I think that's setting pretty good, so I'm going to leave it go at that. Now another thing you want to do, and this should be done before you adjust your pan level, is check your dog out, make sure there's no burrs on it. If there's any burrs on it, especially on the side that has contact with the pan notch, you want to take a file and file those burrs off of there. Just make it nice and flat. Another thing you want to do is square up the end of this dog right here. Just take your file and make it nice and square. A couple burrs on the side here I'm going to get rid of. Okay, that's all nice and square. The pan's setting fairly level, so I'm going to leave it at that right now. Now, to adjust my pan tension, some people do it different ways. Some people will actually take their nut driver and their screwdriver and tighten this bolt and nut up to give it the pan tension they want. I like my pans to have very little side play. This one has some, but not a whole lot. And I like my pans to drop free on their own weight. And this one has a little wiggle side to side, so I'm going to tighten it up just a little to take that play out. Still has a little too much. And the wiggle's gone. And the pan drops pretty much on its own. It has a little bit of stick there, but that'll work out. That's just the way I want that pan. Now I'll adjust my pan tension. It's the way I do it. So I take my dog and I sit right on the pan post, just like that. Then I'll take a pair of pliers right over the middle of the dog. And I'll put one jaw right in the middle of the dog and one jaw underneath the frame, and I will squeeze down. This will increase your pan tension. You only want to go a little at a time and check it. If you want less pan tension, you just got to bend your dog the other way. Now I got that bent down a little. I'm going to set my trap. Okay. Now, since I bent that down, I cannot set my trap. My dog's actually sticking out too far now. They're sticking into the pan too far. So I got to take this and move it back out some. Just take a hammer and bend it just a little. Go ahead and try to set it and see where it's at. Okay, you have to come back in just a little. That pan's sitting just a little bit high. So I got to come in just a little more, not much. I'm bending it very, very little. And I'm going to go ahead and bring it down into my night latch. And that pan is setting nice and level now. And I can tell just by experience that this has probably about 1.5 pounds of tension to set it off. I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that. As far as telling your poundage that it takes to set your pan off, they make a thing called a trap tester that has little rings marked on it. It's a little push style device. You set your trap and you push down the middle of your pan and you watch it push down, and there'll be a marker that comes up on those rings that are on there, and it'll snap off at the 1, 2, or 3 or 4 pound level. Another way to do it, you could get a plastic bottle filled up with some sand and weigh it 1 pound or 2 pounds, and use that for putting that on there. Other people use 2x4s. They'll cut a 2x4 off and weigh it and see how much it weighs. Get a pound, 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds, whatever they want for the pan tension. Now for my fox and raccoon traps, I like to have right about 1.5 to 2 pounds of tension for setting my trap off. It seems to work good for me. There's a lot of trappers that like that pan weight adjustment. Coyotes, some people go up to 4 or 5 pounds for coyotes. It just all depends on what you like. That's pretty much all I do to adjust my traps for good performance. This trap right here, just the way it is, will catch a fox and it will catch a raccoon, and it will hold them with no problem. One more thing you might want to do is check the inside of your jaws. Make sure there's no sharp edges. This one here is actually pretty good. It has rounder edges on it, and what that does is make sure that the animal's not going to have a cut skin from this trap closing on it. If there are sharp edges on here, it will cut the animal. If there are sharp edges, what you can do, now this isn't a pair of vice grips, but if you had a pair of vice grips, you could lock that down like that with a pair of vice grips, go around the inside edges with your file on the outside edge as well. Or you can even set it and take a piece of wire and wire that open until you get that all filed and nice and smooth. I think it's very important to have your jaws filed off smooth on the inside like that. It aids in the animal's comfort whenever he's caught in a trap. This is the equipment that I use to clean up my traps every year. It's just a turkey fryer setup that I picked up at the flea market, and I think I paid like $15 for the pot and the burner. The propane tank, I had to buy that separate. But I got a nice sized pot, and the burner comes with a nice stand. Now, the way I clean my traps is I'll get my burner lit, and I'll take this pot and I'll fill it up with water. And I keep my water about 3 or 4 inches below the top here. And the reason why I do that is so that whenever I add my traps to it, the water doesn't come over the sides. Alright, after I get everything lit, get the water in here, set it on the burner, start warming up. I like to add some baking soda. And I just get this baking soda at the dollar store. It works just as good as the expensive stuff. And I'll put about a half a box of this to 1 pot of water. You want to add your baking soda before your water starts getting hot. If you add it afterwards, it'll give it a real rough boil and it might come over and splash on you. You don't want that. But after I get that in there, I'll let the water come up to a nice low boil or a very hard simmer, and then I'll add my traps. And the way I add my traps is I have about a half dozen traps on a piece of wire here, and that's what I use to lower my traps into the water. I'll put them in nice and easy, being careful not to splash any hot water anywhere. I just take this piece of wire and hang it over the side just like that. I'll let the water come back up to a hard simmer or a low boil, and I'll let them in there for about 15-20 minutes. Usually does the job for me. After I leave them in there for about 15 or 20 minutes, I'll take this pot off of the burner and place it on the ground. I'll take a fresh 5-gallon bucket of water and I'll dump the water in there, floating any of the old dirt and debris or wax or anything else that might have been on them traps. I'll float it off. And the reason why I do that is whenever I bring my traps back up out of that water, I don't want them getting recoated with all that junk that I just cleaned off of them. So after I float the water off, I'll just pull my traps up out and I'll hang these up to dry. This is what I use to dye my traps. I just use speed dip. It comes in a quart container, and you usually mix it 1 part speed dip to 3 parts gasoline. You can use Coleman lantern fuel or kerosene. I like to use gas. Now, a lot of people complain about this, say they don't trust it because it's petroleum based and they're afraid of the smell scaring off animals. I personally haven't really noticed any difference in my catches using it, so that's why I use it, and it works for me. Basically, I just keep this all year round in a 5-gallon bucket. And whenever I go to dip my traps in it, I'll stir it up and get everything stirred up, make sure it's all mixed up real nice. Alright, after the traps are all cleaned, they got a nice little coating of rust on new ones. I'll dip them in my speed dip here. And what I have here is some 110 size body grip traps that have taken on a nice coating of rust. So I'm going to go ahead and dip these in here and show you just how this covers them. Now, it's not quite deep enough, so I'm just going to swish it around a little, make sure everything gets nice coating on there, and bring them back up out, and I'll let the dye drip off of them for a little while. And there, I got 1 coating of dye on them. Now I'll take these and hang them up after they're done dripping for a little bit, and if they need another coating, I'll go ahead and just dip them right back in there again after a day. And if they need any more, every other day I'll dip them again until I'm comfortable with the coating that's on them. But that's all there is to using speed dip for dyeing your traps. Nice, quick, and pretty clean.